the theory that capitalism is one of the most powerful things in the world and has lifted more people out of poverty than virtually anything else. And it's the belief that making money is important, of course, it's the lifeblood of the organization, but it's not the only thing. It's about having a higher purpose, believing in something greater than yourself and pulling in that direction. Stakeholder orientation, conscious leadership, having leadership at the helm that is really driving these things. And of course, conscious culture. So I'm honored to be able to present or introduce Mark Kovacevic tonight. Mark is president of our North American enterprise for Improving, and he's an international leader in delivering technology consulting and training. He's responsible for all the international operations execution and implementation of Improving's vision and purpose. In addition, Mark is responsible for the corporate integration of the Improving's merger and acquisition strategy, of which I should say he's very, very busy these days with regards to that. Through a combination of leadership excellence and teamwork, Improving has enjoyed great success, becoming a 9-time recipient of the Inc. 500 award. He's based in Columbus, Ohio, and Mark's efforts led to the enterprise, receiving the Inc. 500 5000 awards and 50 best places to work in the markets that Improving serves. He's very active in the Columbus philanthropic community and currently serves as the board of director for Columbus Speech and Hearing, Elvis 180, the Goodwill Business Advisory Council, the Central Ohio Conscious Capitalism Chapter, and the Columbus Chamber of Commerce Small Business Council. He's a proud graduate of Ohio State, has a wife and 2 kids, and he loves it when Michigan kicks the heck out of the Buckeyes. He's the proud recipient of the first Under 40 award in 2010. And with that, Mark, I will throw it over to you and welcome and thank you very much for sharing your ideas tonight.
Thanks, Mark. I had no idea that you were going to read that. That's more of a print bio. I guess a more
impressive. I got to be honest with you.
A little short introduction would be, hey, I'm Mark. I love conscious capitalism, and I really don't like Michigan football. But let me go ahead into the love part of conscious capitalism, see if I can get this Zoom share to work. Mark, can you give me the thumbs up on that screen share? Okay. So welcome. Thank you for joining me tonight for really what is a discussion and a presentation about conscious capitalism and how it can be operationalized. Conscious capitalism as a whole is really about elevating humanity through the power of business. You know, I believe in my soul and in my DNA that conscious capitalism can be used as a power for good. I believe capitalism can be used as a power for good. It's the consciousness that allows it to do so, right? It's about conscientiously thinking not just of profits, but of purpose, and where we go with this. Now, I don't know how many people currently on the call read the book.
I cannot hear Mark.
You can't hear me?
I can hear you, Mark. This is Shannon. I can hear you.
Anyone else having difficulties?
Nope, you're coming over loud and clear for us.
Okay. So from I'm sorry, I kind of lost my train of thought there, but the way that conscious capitalism can elevate humanity and bring business together for powers of good is really what drives my heart. I mean, during that introduction, you know, Mark kind of shared a number of the nonprofits that I closely work with, and to me, it just strikes as something that is so very, very important. And as I was talking a little bit about reading the book, as you read the book, it tells a powerful story. It sends a powerful message. It creates a powerful vision. But what I feel it leaves a little bit out of is how do you bring it to life, right? How do you take your business and really turn it into a conscious business, right? How do you measure it? How do you understand your impacts? What key things are you thinking of as a business owner or as a stakeholder within your business that you can look at to understand how you're truly living into the conscious model. During the small group discussion with John and Dave and Craig, Preston, and later Mark, kind of talked a little bit about where we are in our business life cycle. And conscious capitalism is relatively new when you get right down to it. It hasn't been around for 100 years or 200 years like capitalism itself. So we're kind of new at this, and it's going to take a little bit of time to permeate it. So I feel it's very important for us to get this message out as business leaders and members of our community that conscious capitalism can do good. So as you probably know, and Mark just kind of shared with you, there are 4 pillars of conscious capitalism. There's higher purpose, stakeholder orientation, conscious leadership, conscious culture. And all of these things kind of combine to form a conscious business. I will dip into this a little bit. I did a little straw poll in my small group, and the general consensus was, yeah, I could use a little bit of additional insight on those 4 pillars and what they really are. So I will dip into that a little bit. So let's start with higher purpose. For us, conscious businesses focus on purpose beyond profit. Some ways you can kind of internalize this as triple P's: people, planet, purpose, people, planet, profits. There's a couple different ways to internalize this, but the way that it sinks in with me is creating a business that does have that purpose beyond profit. Profit's great. There's nothing wrong with profit. You need profit. Businesses need profit. Without profit, Mark wouldn't be able to thank those sponsors, and we wouldn't be here, right? Because that's what drives the opportunity for us to do good. A good higher purpose is a purpose that engages all stakeholders, because each stakeholder in the business ecosystem has a viable interest in your success. And then finally, a reason for a higher purpose is trust. People trust companies that are motivated by a higher cause rather than just a transaction. When you think about some of the businesses that have the lowest level of trust, if you've looked at any trust ratings, they tend to be the ones that are most transactional by nature. Sales, car sales, real estate sales, things that are just truly transactional tend to have the lowest levels of trust. And it's because the motivation within those businesses have traditionally been the transaction, right? There's not a lot of purpose behind it, right? Now you could say that, yes, I want to sell you a reliable car. Yes, I want to, make sure that you're safe and secure in your new home. But at the end of the day, they tend to be very legalistic wranglings, and they tend to be focused on the transaction, not the purpose, right? There's been some new real estate organizations that have kind of taken on the mantra of, I don't want to sell you a house, I want to sell you a home. I want to create a vision for you. I want to create a future where you can raise your family and create your memories. Those are the organizations that are moving forward in more of a conscious manner. Still got a ways to go, but moving forward. A good example, and as I was reviewing this deck today, I thought about taking this out, but decided, I want to keep it in. Southwest Airlines has a great purpose. Their purpose is give people the freedom to fly, which is awesome. Coronavirus notwithstanding, I understand that this purpose right now might be a little difficult, but I don't think it changes the way Southwest has represented their purpose. I mean, when air travel was relatively common, you couldn't go 30 days without seeing a news headline about how a Southwest gate agent created a situation that allowed a loved one to witness the birth of a child or something like that, where they had the ability and they were empowered to make a judgment that adhered to their purpose. It just permeates throughout that organization. And I thought I read within the last couple of weeks that this is expected to be the first quarter in more than 20 years that Southwest Airlines is going to lose money. So the financial benefits of their purpose is spectacular. Their brand reputation is off the charts, but it really is all about that purpose that they're living into. Second key tenet of conscious capitalism is stakeholder orientation. And this is really the business recognizing the value and impacts that happens throughout the entire ecosystem. And the reason that I find this so incredibly powerful is not necessarily that it says all stakeholders are created equal, but it means all stakeholders should be considered as the business is making a decision. Additionally, how the business engages their stakeholders is incredibly important, right? Because you take the whole construct of the ecosystem, and this can be related to both large businesses and small businesses, which is something that is also powerful. You know, John had a 2-person shop that he had mentioned, you know, that can have a stakeholder orientation because they have an ecosystem, right? Dave had a 90-person shop. They have an ecosystem, maybe bigger, maybe deeper, but it's still the ecosystem. And, you know, Campbell's, which is on the left, has a stakeholder in an ecosystem, a stakeholder model in an ecosystem, as does Whole Foods, right? So each business, regardless of size, can really share in the concept and the construct of a stakeholder model as really a meaning-making mechanism, you know, as decisions come in and where you make your investments and where you apply your scarce time to try to drive to the purpose of the conscious business through the stakeholder model. Third tenet, conscious leadership. To me, this is the most squishiest of the pillars. And I find it really, really hard to define, but I know it when I see it, right? Conscious leaders cultivate environments of trust, care, and service. I internalize this as servant leadership. I don't know how many people on the call may have heard of Agile software development. We're a consulting firm, so I kind of got a little bit of techie in me. And Agile software development is really about leading through service, right? Serving the purpose of the company, supporting individuals, creating value for the whole stakeholders, for all stakeholders in that business ecosystem, you know, focusing on we, not me. So in the way that I kind of internalize this is what does make for a conscious leader. I think it's really about following these 4 little areas, you know, around emotional intelligence, analytical intelligence, spiritual, and systems, and kind of bringing that all together to love, care, and be a servant to your organization, be a servant to your purpose. That's how I internalize it the best. But there's certainly other ways to do so. Conscious leadership, like I said, is to me the most hard to wrap really good definition around. But it is something that I tend to recognize in individuals when I see it. It's a little harder than some of the other ones. Conscious culture, the guiding principles and practices of a business. It's your identity, right? How is your business, how is that conscious culture interconnected between all of the people, all the process, you know, the purpose? It fosters love, care, and trust between all company stakeholders. It's what creates that magic moment of culture where team members can rely on one another beyond just checking the box, but that feeling that they're going to go beyond to help one another, not just in a business perspective, but from a personal perspective too. And how is that bi-directional relationship between the organization and the individuals that are working within that organization, the leadership? How are you cultivating those sorts of things? And to me, it's important, as you know, this Tom Peters graphic. I don't know if anyone's familiar with Tom Peters. I feel like he's the unconscious father of the conscious capitalism movement, because his quote is, you know, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And, you know, strategy is that tip of the iceberg, what's above the waterline. These are your products, what the market knows you as, you know, what your marketing collateral has, your sales approach externally. But inside, it's that real culture, and that's what binds things together. That's what allows people to work just that much harder, run that extra mile. engage that customer, you know, to do the next level thing, whatever that might be. It's what empowers the Southwest gate agent to hold that plane, even though it's going to cost them $100,000 in flight delays. It's that culture and the values that really makes it important. So as a wrap up here, you know, purpose, engage stakeholders, higher purpose beyond profitability. Culture, what's that interconnectivity? What's the glue that holds that business, that conscious culture together? Leadership, how are leaders serving the purpose, serving the culture of the business? And the stakeholder model is how the ecosystem of the business it reacts and is reacted to based off its actions. So I want to take a little pause here. Mark, how are we handling, you know, interactive Q&A? Because I'd like to take a little pause here to make sure that we're kind of clear on this, or if anyone has any shortened questions about any of those pillars.
Yeah, there's actually a question in the chat, Mark. If you pull up the chat, I can also read the question out. So this question comes from...
Could you read it? Because I'm scared to do that.
Absolutely, yeah. So this question is from Joel Hodroff. I hope I pronounced that right, Joel. He asks, what do you have to say about systems change versus incrementalism versus bigger band-aids at a time when it is more apparent than ever that the system is failing all of its stakeholders, including the earth?
So that's an awesome
big question. Big question.
It is a gigantic question. And honestly, Joel, I don't think I'm qualified to answer that at a global perspective, because it's bigger than me. And my gut check answer is systemic change, rip and replace. But the feasibility of that at a macro level frightens me, and I haven't fully thought through the impacts. I can tell you that within our organization, we didn't have to execute a systemic upheaval change because we were already leaning into a lot of this. There's a concept within the conscious capitalism movement called consciously capitalist. We were kind of already operating in this area and operating under these ideals without having the vocabulary and definitions to be able to talk about it at an elevated level. We were kind of already moving in that direction. At a macro level, like I said, I wish it was systematic change, but I honestly don't know how feasible that is grounded in reality. I think that incrementally is, whether I want it to be or not, the best way to move the needle in this. Does that make sense? I wish I could see your response or have a continued dialogue about it, because it's an awesome question.
Mark, we do have another question that came up.
Sure.
How do you adopt, and this is actually pretty apropos, and you might, this one I think you could comment on. How do you adopt these principles if you are owned by a private equity firm and very
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to laugh. What was the last part, Mark?
I did not write that, I promise. How do you adopt these principles if you are owned by a private equity firm and very performance management driven?
So, interestingly enough, part of what you're going to see in this presentation should help you make that business case. And incidentally, Improving is owned by a majority of Improving is owned by a private equity firm. The short and sweet answer is it turns into an incredible growth story. The longer answer is we were already operating in this philosophy when we were acquired, and we believe that this is what powers us from the financial. It's one of the key components that powers us from a financial perspective. There's a fantastic reference that I have at the end of this slide deck, which Mark can circulate. at the end of this, but inside the Conscious Capitalism book, there are a bunch of business cases that really lay out how organizations that are elevated into a conscious business outperform their peers by huge numbers. The numbers are so dramatically different. We're talking about 13% better compounded annually over 20 years, which for those of you who've got some finance background, it makes you scratch your head and think that they're falsified. So I don't even really quote them because they seem so outlandish. But when I'm talking to individuals like private equity firms, the proof is in the pudding, right? The proof is in the numbers because that's where they're driving to. And by allowing an organization to move to this is the safest way to guarantee excessive shareholder returns for them.
And I've got a couple of other questions. You've actually answered some of this, but newbie question here. I haven't read the book, and this will show, but how could any company not be in favor of these 4 categories? We all care about culture and leadership, for example. What separates a company following these principles from others?
The willingness to adopt new beliefs. This threads the needle, and I've seen some visceral reactions. And interesting, in the small group, I had mentioned it to a couple of the individuals who weren't necessarily part of an organization that would normally be leaning this way. Businesses that have been around a long time tend to react poorly to things like this because you're moving someone's cheese, right? Wait, why do I have to care about the lemmings that run my business? Why do I care about the truck driver who brings my inventory? Tell him to just do his job and get out of the way. That sort of mentality, as challenging as it is, for me to even think about it, it permeates business right now. You've got individuals who run publicly traded companies where analysts are beating them every 90 days over the head with expectations. It's very challenging to say, you know what? We are not going to focus on the next 90 days. We are going to make a strategic investment that is going to pay off tenfold, but it's going to take time. We are going to invest in our people. We are going to reinvent the supply chain, similar to what Campbell's had done under Denise's leadership, where they pivoted away from canned soup, which had been their bread and butter for 50 years. I mean, gosh, I can't even tell you how ingrained that Rockwell painting of the Campbell's soup is in everybody's head, to fresh, on-demand food. Pivot away from the soup, but to everything else, right? So it seems like it would be easy, but old habits die hard, and industrialization mindset and profit-driven only mantra. I mean, I went to school for a finance degree. It was literally beat into my head by my finance teachers. The company exists to serve its shareholders. And that sounded horrible to me at the time. And oh God, now it's just almost repulsive to me personally. No offense to everyone. I love profits, but that's not why companies exist, in my opinion.
Last question, and I'll let you get back to it. Mark, do you believe that the crisis such as the COVID pandemic and the economic fallout causes companies to abandon or embrace conscious capitalism?
I'm a data guy, and I don't know if there's enough supporting data to accurately answer that question. I can tell you from my opinion, it feels like yes, because as I'm conducting, business interactions and having discussions with other business leaders, I feel it kind of snapped everybody back to what's important, and at the root level of humanity, what's important is we're healthy. What's important is we're happy. What's important is our loved ones are safe. We care for one another. So I think it offers a moment for us to feel that way that has made it better than pre-COVID, because we've had a chance to take a breath and maybe stop being so busy and be a little bit more reflective. but it's purely anecdotal. I think the economic impacts are starting to shift away from that. I'm starting to hear things that are less, we're in this together, and a little more, hey, we need to get back to profits. So I don't know how that's going to shake out at a macro level, but to me, that's more of a data-oriented question. It feels good to me when I talk to business leaders, but we'll see. So all of that stuff about conscious capitalism sounds great. Why'd you just decide to try it? Hey, Mark, before I go further, what's my time check at? When am I supposed to be done with this?
About 10 after 5 or 10 after 6 your time. So
Okay, so I got about 25 minutes.
Yeah, also, but we've had such great discussion with these questions.
Yeah.
I mean, the event will go through 5:30 and we may just sacrifice that ending debrief because I think answering these questions has been really helpful.
Okay, I'm going to short circuit some of this and go a little quicker than I normally would to continue the dialogue. I actually honestly appreciate that more than delivering the presentation. So that sounds awesome, but why'd you decide to do it? So back in 2009, our CEO was at a conference, and the CEO of Rackspace was delivering a presentation, and he said, how many people in the crowd have had a great experience with their technology partners? And 6 hands went up in that crowd of 120 CEOs. And, you know, our CEO was one of their hands, and he kind of looked around. It's like, gosh, if we're ever going to make a difference, we've got to be different. And that sort of planted the seeds of our move into unconscious conscious capitalism. We didn't have the vocabulary, we didn't have the words, but we knew we wanted to make a difference. Kind of already talked about this, so I'm going to skip on this thing. I will skip on this business case as well. Actually, you know what? No, let me go back to this. You know, profits are the best when they're not your only goal. Happiness does not come from fantastic profits. The bonuses are great, but it's really about the relationships that we develop as humans, whether it's to our clients, to our coworkers, our peers, our communities. That's what makes the human experience. Profits are something we manage to. Profits are essential. We need profits. It's like the air we breathe. Without them, the business dies. It is necessary. But when that is the only thing that is driven, in the end, I believe it creates a slow death of an organization. It might take hundreds of years for that death to happen, but the soul kind of gets cut out of it. There is a huge business case. I did overstate that outperform. It's 12%, not 13%. I do apologize for that. But the business case for conscious capitalism, to answer that question with the PE, for the PE individual, take a peek at this slide. This is pulled directly from the book, and there is business cases in the appendix of the book that will really lead into this. At the end of the day, why wouldn't you want to do this? Why wouldn't you want to outperform your peers by 12% annually? Why wouldn't you want to reduce turnover? Why wouldn't you want to lower your marketing costs, right? Why wouldn't you want to do all these great business things while doing good? To me, it's almost feels foolish not to want to do this, right? That being said, it does require you to take a step back and maybe rethink some of the political capital that had been spent in the past. And hey, maybe we can do this other thing differently. That kind of leads into that systemic change or incremental improvement question. It requires a rethinking, it requires a relooking. And these sorts of movements like conscious capitalism, personally, I think work best when they're driven both from grassroots and top down, but that can't always be the case. So moving on to the other reason why we did this, our commitment as an organization is to create a great place to work. This is something that every single improver has the expectation of leadership from. And if we fail on these commitments, we failed as an organization. One of the big things that we do is share in the success and the accomplishments of our company. This is a huge thing for us, right? We want to have owners. And this is also to the individual who is owned by a private equity firm. I did mention that the majority of our ownership is by private equity. I can also tell you for sure, it's 3 for sure, because I don't know how many other people are on this call. 3 individuals from Improving also own a piece of the organization. We actually have, I believe there's 60 individuals at this point that own a slice of Improving outside that PE firm. We want to create people that own our organization. Leaning into conscious capitalism is a great way to demonstrate that for us. So now, that's great. So how did you bring this to life? Oh my God, it's such a boring thing. We did a scorecard. So in 2016, late 2016, early 2017, we were doing all this stuff, but at the end of the day, what matters gets measured. And we were playing a little bit loose, a little more entrepreneurial than our size was going to allow us. We had gotten to a critical mass at that point, probably had around 200, 250 improvers, multiple offices, and we were just a little too much entrepreneurial oriented, kind of like, we'll just figure it out, everything will be in our head. So what we did is we created a balanced scorecard. And the interesting thing about what we did there is we overlapped our balanced scorecard, which for those of you who aren't familiar, there's a resource at the end of what a balanced scorecard is, but it kind of measures your business from multiple different perspectives in a uniform manner, very similar to a stakeholder model, actually. And this overlay became how we were injecting conscious capitalism into our scorecard. Each one of these quadrants has no more than 5 metrics. And what I'll take you through is how valuable each of those metrics are from a conscious capitalism point. So our higher purpose is to positively change the perception of the IT professional by creating environments of trust for all of our stakeholders. That's what we're all about. That's what we try to do, right? We want to take that IT profession and turn it into a positive response. We don't want to go into another CEO conference when there's 120 other peers and only 6 of them have had a positive IT experience. We've
got a quick question.
Sure.
What is the services the customer measures?
So I will get to that,
Okay.
if that's okay. When I share them with you, I'll share with the other ones that we have as well. So this is our purpose. So, okay, so how do we measure that? Or what is how do we convey trust? Trust is everything in our organization. If you were to go out to the Improving's website, the very first thing you'd see is trust changes everything. This is our brand promise. This is something that we owe to one another. It's something that we owe to our clients and our community, is to build trust. We believe it is incredibly powerful. And frankly, it saddens me when I see the erosion of trust in the world, in the United States, in institutions. It's something that I fundamentally believe is the underpinnings of positive relationships. And it's something that we as an organization are committed to improving. So how did we do this? So you mentioned the services component. This is one of our service measurements. And this is a quick review. The way that we try to see if we're living into our higher purpose is we measure each and every one of our consultants in a collaborative engagement. We ask 10 questions with our client about how our consultant is doing. We ask them how they're performing. We ask them if they're living into the value of excellence. But most importantly, we ask them, are they creating trust? And we scale that and we track that individual by individual by individual by individual. each of one of these individual reviews has a trust score associated with that. What you're looking at right here is a consolidation of each one of our enterprises has a balanced scorecard. This is a consolidation of all of our enterprises coming together and how we're measuring trust at the enterprise level. Because after all, that's our purpose, right? How are we doing? And we track it every day. We track it every time. We track it each one of our enterprises, and we roll it up and we review this at the corporate level to see how our consultants, which is frankly our bread and butter. I mean, we're a consulting organization. The people are our product. We don't have a widget that someone can trust or not trust. We have people. So this is incredibly important for us. But we don't stop there on the services side of things. We also go into an account review. And this is how is improving performing for you as an organization. Very, very similar methodology. 10 questions, a couple of free form things. What can we improve in? But once again, trust. That's what's driving it. That's how we have determined we will be able to measure our adherence to higher purpose. Now, we've been tracking this, like I said, since 2017 and seen marked improvement, both in our overall scores and in our trust scores. And interestingly enough, seeing as how our Twin Cities here, little shout out to the Twin Cities team. On the lower graph, you can see that their trust scores off the charts. They scored higher than any other of our offices in how they were building trust with our clients. But this is something that we share open and honestly. I mean, we don't shrink from these sorts of results. We look to improve upon them, and we continue to improve upon them. And don't quote me on this, Mark, but I'm pretty sure that from a trust perspective for this calendar year, you guys have actually improved on that 4.8. Is that right?
That's correct.
This is where it's at. This is what we lean into. So stakeholder orientation. This is improving stakeholder model. We look at our suppliers, our members, that's our owners. We look at our partners, industry, community, clients, suppliers, and how we make decisions and how they impact each one of these sections matters. One of the reasons that I'm here is because I want to support Mark. I want to support Sally. I want to support all the improvers that are on this call to show you that I believe this matters. I want to support the community, the Twin Cities community, which we're a part of. I want to support the industry. There's a bunch of different industries represented here, plus this is a user group. We support these things. This is part of our DNA. And as such, we host user groups. Each one of our offices, Improving Consulting and a training organization, we have training space. These numbers are from 2018. We had 793 user groups that shared our space in 2018. In 2019, that number moved over to 903. Through the first 3 months of 2020, there were going to be more than 1,000 users. We're on track for more than 1,000 user groups sharing our space. And those user groups are nonprofits. They are things like this, the Conscious Capitalism Meetup, technology, special interest groups, anything. We buy everybody pizza. I know, John, in the small group you had mentioned, I really liked it when there was pizza. I wish I had some pizza too. Unfortunately, the pandemic and the social distancing's kind of put the brakes on that. But we do this because we're committed. We are committed to our stakeholders. We invest in our stakeholders. We invest in the community. And this is one way that we measure how conscious we're being. How conscientious are we being? How much of a conscious business are we? Are we really living into this? We look at the number of attendees. How many individuals have we impacted? Not just the number of groups, but how many actual people did we get to positively impact by our philosophy of conscious capitalism? And then on to the sticky, kind of icky, fuzzy, tough one, conscious leadership. What we've done is we've melded together a number of leadership programs into some general and some advanced leadership programs. Inside of improving, We have a course catalog of more than 90 courses that are taught for improvers by improvers. These individuals are leading by example. They're sharing their information. They're sharing, making improvers better. Our leadership team teaches advanced leadership course. I personally teach a course that happens once or twice a year, depending on where we're at in the business cycle, around communication and awareness. DISC is a class that every single improver takes. Strength Finders, every single improver goes through Strength Finders. All of these things allow us to display and generate conscious leadership, right? Like I said, I personally define it as servant leadership. Am I walking the talk? Am I doing what I expect others to be doing as well? And finally, the Stagen Leadership Academy, a little shout out to one of our partners here. Stagen Leadership Academy is spectacular for executive level leadership. They are very, very valuable members of the conscious capitalism community. Their CEO serves on the board of the National Conscious Capitalism Board. And if you're ever looking for some really, really high-powered advanced leadership training, I would encourage you to check them out. But how do we track this? We track our industry contributions. We track our speaking engagements. That's how we can materially give back to the community. That's how we can help industries. That's how we can help others learn and grow. If we're truly committed to those things, we have to execute those things as leaders of our organization. Now, this just isn't leaders talking. This is everybody talking throughout our entire organization. We look at how we're participating and how we're leaning in and constantly measuring these against targets. Each one of the enterprises has their own individual targets prior to those getting rolled up into a consolidated version. Interestingly here, the Twin Cities at this point in 2019 had 11 speaking engagements. I believe they've exceeded 11 so far this year. So it just shows that this message and this management and working towards this creates that constant improvement and makes us more and more and more of a conscious business. We do a lot of speaking around topics, same sort of things, but that business component is really where conscious capitalism is growing. And you can see that it went from 34, or it's continues to grow. It actually may have been cut off a little bit here into guiding principles. You know, our philosophy of conscious capitalism continues to grow. So these are things that we manage and we measure to it. And then finally, conscious culture. You know, we do build trust by exceeding expectations of others. How do we measure that? Engagement. We internalize how we're creating a culture of engagement, how we're creating a culture of involvement. And we are looking for improvers to be engaged at least once a quarter for an event that is not during the working hours. That's our one event engagement. Are they participating in a team building exercise? Are people participating in improving use? Social hours, happy hours, team building events, activities, fun things. And each one of our enterprises is creating these opportunities for engagement. And it's a really great circular feedback loop, because once people become involved in it, it tends to cycle upon itself, very similar to a user group or a professional group like this. Hey, I went to this one, now I want to go to the next one. I know people there now. And, you know, when you think about taking this back to a business perspective, I'm sure people have heard retention studies that productivity and retention skyrockets if you have a friend at work. It goes up even more if you have a, quote, best friend at work. So we actively track these and measure these. And we also measure something called involvement. Improving has an EIP program, which stands for our Employee Involvement Program. Each one of these events and engagement points is assigned a set number of points. You know, whether it's going to a user group meeting, a network event, running a book club, writing a blog post, giving a speaking engagement, referring business, all sorts of different things. And we track these by individual. In each one of our enterprises, pays out a cash reward based off of points on a quarter-over-quarter basis. So it's not just time, it's not just effort, it's not just, awareness, but we're also investing, right? And that's really what ties all of this together. Now, for some of you chart people out there, this was probably awesome. But for people who might be a little more business oriented, there's so many charts. So what were the results? Get to the results. What's the meat here? So 11 Inc. 500 awards. Apparently I got to update my bio. And 50 plus best places to work in every single market we serve in. Cool. Those are nice. But what about the numbers? So you can see in 2010, we were a $12.8 million revenue organization. In 2019, our revenue was $107 million. And this goes back to the private equity question. I think if you were to put this in front of your private equity firm, they would take that return happily so many, many, many times over. But there's a little bit of interesting things in here. As we went through our organizational life cycle, and we continue to go through it, you can see we kind of flatlined in 2014, 15, and 16. That was when we started gravitating towards conscious capitalism. And we were fervent supporters, as fervent today as we were then, but we weren't measuring it. When we started integrating it into our measurements and into our process and into our focus with discipline and diligence, that's what really powered us from a revenue perspective in 2018, 2019. So cool, that's great. What do I do next? Well, think about your organization's higher purpose. Identify, understand the organization's stakeholder model, because I think that's the best starting point, is to figure out how you're impacting both inside and outside of the organization. Think about some of the measurements that are already in place and how you guys cultivate your unique culture. Not all cultures are created equally. Not all are the same. They don't have to be. They have to be yours. They have to be unique. And they have to make people feel a part of it. That's the most important thing. And finally, read the book. It's a good read. I mean, it really is. It's very story oriented. And it's got some fantastic, for the number crunchers out there, it does have some fantastic business information out there. So I'll take a pause here. Hey, Mark, I have my next slide has the questions for small group, but I'll open it up to any questions that may have come in during that second half.
Actually, I've got a slide with the small group questions.
Okay, great.
And then Alyssa's going to actually put them in the chat.
Okay.
Before we switch out and we break out into rooms, are there any questions that we have for Mark? Nope. Okay. Let's see here.
Wait,
Go ahead.
I got one. I think we got one in the chat.
I am sharing my screen, so I'm not able to see the chat.
Alyssa, I think you muted.
You are right. Sorry. Yes, I will read it out since so
Thank you.
question. We have an old and large client that is a nonprofit.
Okay.
They are struggling to change culture and align to something new versus using the same measures or mission X out of poverty. Each interpret it differently. How can nonprofits align money for mission?
So one of the nonprofits that I serve on went through an exercise called linking money to mission. Very, very similar to the words you just used. We went through a planning exercise in which the way that we had defined our mission and where we defined our mission was misaligned with our revenue sources and our time investment. So by going through that exercise, it helped align it. how a nonprofit, in my view, can become a more conscious business is to A, sharpen up that alignment, and B, pivot the purpose to what really matters. A lot of times I feel like nonprofits tend to be a little slower moving than private organizations, and they tend to be a little more caring, which at times hurts them. Conscious capitalism is not about exhausting all of your money and goodwill until the nonprofit dissolves because it can't exist anymore. It's about properly managing the money and donations that others have supported into the organization to provide the services that are in accordance with the mission. Sometimes that can get twisted up a little bit in nonprofits, has been my experience. Does that answer your question? I know it's hard for dynamic.
Yes, there was a response of yes, that answers your question, the question. And there was a question that was answered in the chat, but a question was asked of how do you create these amazing dashboards? Was it third party or homegrown? And Mark did answer that in the chat. So I will reference that.
But yeah, this whole slide deck can be available to you. And here's the other thing: if you have other management teams that you guys are like, hey, you know, my other team could really see this. I heard your words, but I don't know if I can, you know, power through it. Just reach out to Mark or Alyssa. I'm more than willing to deliver this presentation at a smaller scale because it's important to me. I mean, if there's a business on this presentation that shifts into a more conscious business operating model because of this, I feel like this has been just an incredibly valuable use of my time.
Well, great. Well,